Okay, cool. So my talk will be about why the future of Ruby is crystal clear. So let me tell you about my name, about me. I'm Paul Oguda. I'm a software developer from Andela. How many of you have heard about Andela? Okay. So anyway, for those who haven't, Andela is a company that is based, it's like we have a presence in Africa, that is Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, Egypt as well. I think we tried to enter South Africa, but they didn't manage. Maybe they'll try again. And hopefully after this talk, it will make their path here easier. So I go by the handle of Kamal Oguda, that is everywhere. So a little bit about Andela is, one thing is they actually facilitated my travel. So I just want to give them a shout out and tell you something about them. One thing is they invest in some of Africa's most talented software engineers. So that's why I've used some, because I know we have a lot of them here in South Africa as well. So they also help companies. Their main job is helping companies to solve technical talent shortage. So they do this through building high performance distributed engineering teams, because we have like developers in Africa working for partners all over the world. Okay, cool. So to my talk, how many of you have done Ruby? Like they do Ruby professionally? Okay. So how many of you don't write Ruby professionally? Okay. So anyway, this talk maybe it's meant for those people who haven't done Ruby professionally. So according to you, how many of you believe that Ruby is dead? Okay. So that means like I should just go back and sit since. Okay, another question is, how many of you believe Ruby is dying? At least I have one audience. Then I'll use him. Okay, how many of you have issues with performance in their Ruby? Okay, how many of you have other issues with Ruby? Let's say you need types. Okay, cool. So different people have different perception with regard to the state of Ruby. There are those who believe that Ruby is alive. There are those who believe that Ruby is dead. One thing, when I started Ruby, I think that was back in 2013. In Kenya, we have like PHP, I think was the main thing. We also had Android. So in the event you wanted a job, you had to do either PHP or Android. But I started with Ruby and I stuck with it all the way. One thing this resulted in is when I was with my friends, they'll talk about PHP, I don't know this. But then PHP didn't have Laravel, or it was still immature. So they were still using CodeIgniter and all that. But I mean, I failed to understand why they'd stick with all those, and yet we had something like Rails. So by then, I think I would count the number of Rails developers with one hand. And also the companies doing Ruby were, I think, less than around 2 or 3 in the entire country. So I think by then I was doing my master's and just doing Ruby on the side. I wasn't that serious with it. I wish I had, because I think I'd be like 100 times better than I am today. Okay, so based on those who see Ruby as either being alive or dead, I just want to show you who is right and who is wrong. So first of all, what is a programming language? So there are like maybe, I think 1,000 definitions of what a programming language is. I'll go with this. So it's a vocabulary and a set of grammatical rules for instructing a computer or a computing device. So this is done to instruct the device to perform specific tasks. And one thing is, when I was designing this talk, I didn't find the best way to compare with programming language. So I think linguistic came to play like one of the best things to use. So linguistically, a language death occurs when a language loses its last native speaker. So another issue is, if you look at the world as it is today, we have like 6% of the world languages, are spoken by about 94% of the population. So that is, I think, English, Mandarin, and Spanish. So we have like around 94% languages being spoken by 6%. The fear and the threat of these languages is in that these languages, maybe in the next millennia, they'll be gone. So like human languages, programming languages die. How many of you here do something like Perl, Prolog, Cold Fusion? Yeah, so if you see like those languages, maybe they are dead or they're dying. But one thing is those languages have like high-paying jobs because we have a lot of systems running on those. So you should learn those languages. So in the event a language doesn't die, a language may face endangerment. Currently, even in the just human languages, we have some languages that are on the threat of extinction. So before a language dies, like animals as well, they become endangered. So people will try to protect this. So in this case, in the human languages whereby you have children being spoken to in a different language other than that of their parents. So currently we have Eleazar coming along. Rubies are starting to do Eleazar. So Ruby is under endangerment. So there's also the issue of children becoming passive bilinguals. These days you hear Rubies speaking JavaScript. We are letting Webpack take over everything. So I actually do Ruby and some JavaScript, but since I don't like JavaScript that much, I've started doing Eleazar and some Crystal, at least to move away from the front end. So through endangerment, we have like the language is then lost due to the children becoming bilingual. The language is then lost to their children, and they will not be able to understand and speak it at all. So you'll find a situation that currently your front end in Rails, you won't be able to recognize it in a few years. Webpack will be gone and all that. You'll be forced to do React on the front end, which is actually sometimes, a good thing. So there's also the issue of grandparents and children are speaking different languages. If you look at Perl, Perl is one of the languages that actually influenced Ruby. But most of the people, you'll hear like the people who started with Ruby, they actually talk about Perl and how maybe the good things it had. They talk about small talk and all that. So it reaches a point that these days we don't do small talk, we don't do Perl. We are in the era of Ruby, Python and all that. Then at this point, people want to be able to communicate effectively with each other. So your children and their grandparents are not able to understand each other. In the current speak, if you look at the battle of the languages, where you have Java and the new languages, the Java guys will always protect Java and let's say .NET. But you have the new crop of developers who are doing things such as Eleazar, Ruby. Before you'd hear that you can't really design let's say you can't do embedded system with something like a compiled language. But if you look at Nerves, Scenic, what it's doing in Eleazar, and hopefully mRuby will survive to be able to facilitate development of IoT applications by Rubist. Yeah. So a number of criteria that can be used to determine a language is endangered is if you look at the number of speakers that are currently living, the mean age of native or fluent speakers. So in programming speak, this can be people who actually do professional, they use the language in their professional careers. So there's also the percentage of youngest generation acquiring fluency with the language in question. So based on this, what about Ruby? If you look at native speakers, in this case, I'll use an example of people who started off with Ruby or people who are getting into programming with Ruby. So Ruby, we have like native speakers are still around. That means Ruby is not dead. We have many people still use Ruby. That means it's not endangered. One thing to note is if you look at the people who started with Ruby back in 2005, most of them are currently CTOs. I'm sure they have actually influenced their companies to adopt Ruby on Rails as the main stack or even as part of their stack. So we have like new software developers are getting started with Ruby. Looking at most of the boot camps, I think I didn't have the right statistics, but I think a majority of them still has Ruby in their stack, and many had that back in the day. And I think one thing is, if you look at the current trend of boot camps, they actually started with, the main stack was always Ruby. I think it was started with people who actually did Ruby on Rails. So there's also the mean age of Ruby developers. I'm not sure about this, but I'll just guess maybe it's about 29 or 27, because you have people doing React, JavaScript and all that. And the young guys currently don't love Ruby anymore. So based on this, looking at the state of Ruby, according to the TOB index, the highest position that Ruby has ever had since 2001 was position 8. That was back in 2016. And the lowest position was number 39 in 2002. It was Language of the Year in 2006. And as at January this year, it was number 11. Last year, it was number 18. So based on this, considering we have like thousands of programming languages, I think Ruby is doing pretty good in terms of its survival. So I think this settles actually the debate that Ruby is dead or dying. But Ruby is awesome, but it's not perfect. We have people who need types. Actually, I've never seen found a reason to use types. Then there's also people who need speed. This I actually came across in my organization, where we had a situation that you're working on a partner project, but the Ruby project, the Rails project has reached a point that is suffering performance. So there's also the issue of many ways of doing the same thing. One thing is, if you look at an array, you're able to do length, size. Like, why don't we have just one way of doing it? Then there's the issue of scalability and concurrency. This is why we have a language such as Eleazar, because I think Jose was, he was just fed up with Ruby. It couldn't give him this. So he went on and made his own language. Then there's the issue of method overloading. Though you can actually do this by using, let's say you have your method accept an argument list, and inside it you can do conditionals, but that's not a good way to do it. Based on this, what I would wish for Ruby to have is something like project creation tools, something like Mix. Why don't we have like Rec, do all the project creation? You can do you can create a Rails project from Rec. You can do a Sinatra project. Let's say we have an IoT framework in future, you can do it with Rec. That's what I'd wish for. Then there's the issue of code formatter. Why don't we take, instead of having Rubocop and running, you can just do Rec format and it formats your Ruby code in a certain way. Because the issue with formatting is you can't really standardize it. You have people arguing over a certain style of another. Then there's the issue of documentation generator. If you look at Eleazar as well, they have documentation as first-class citizens. You can actually develop documentation based on the comments in your code. I'd wish to have this in Ruby. Based on this, if you look at the future of English is not in England, the future of Spanish is not in Portugal, and the future of Portuguese is not in Portugal. Currently, you'll have countries such as Nigeria. Maybe I'm not sure about this, but I'm sure currently most of literature work done in English is not done in England. It's actually done outside England. So that means the future of English language is not really back in England. Based on this, if you look at Ruby, the future of Ruby may not be in Ruby at all. The future of Ruby may be in languages such as Eleazar, Crystal, and others. Because a point of, to back this up, there's the issue of pattern matching, which I think has been introduced recently. It will come, I think it's in Ruby 2.7. I think it's actually from Eleazar and other languages, but I actually believe the prime suspect for introducing it to Ruby was Eleazar. And also there's the issue of concurrency, which may come with Ruby 3.0. which is also something from Eleazar as well. But based on that, let's talk about Crystal. Oh, yeah, I was supposed to do a demo. Okay, cool. So here, what I have is I have a Hello World, Hello World program. So I'll just run it in Ruby. So take note of the extension. How many of you have done Crystal? How many of you have ever heard about Crystal? So that is actually Crystal. So, and also take note of the time it took to run that. So let me do this with Crystal. Oh, that is quite a long time, right? Now, let's compile Crystal. I already have a compiled version. So let me run the compiled version. That one, like, I don't know how long it took, but seems the compiler didn't catch it. So let's go on. So what is Crystal? Crystal is a general purpose, object-oriented and compiled language. It was designed by a company in Argentina called, I think, Manas Technology. And among the guys, we have Ari, Juan, and Brian Cadif. And also there are hundreds of other contributors. So one thing with Crystal is it wants to be fast as C and slick as Ruby. Based on some of the benchmarks I've seen, it's actually performing almost in that area, but not quite as fast as C. But it's like, I think, top 3 from all the benchmarks that was done. Then, okay. So I pointed out the different missing parts of Ruby. If you look at Crystal, it actually equals the missing parts of Ruby. One thing is it has a type system, and each type system is in such a way that you don't have to explicitly show the type that you have, because the compiler is smart enough to infer some of the types. But let's say in the event you want to create an empty array, if you're used to Ruby, you'll find an issue, because you actually have to say this is an array of string or integer. So there's also the issue of speed. It's fast enough. Then it adopts a one way of doing a thing. So instead of having dot length, dot size, we just have size when you want to do the size of an array. Then there's the issue of scalability and concurrency. Currently it's concurrent using something called fibers. But in terms of parallel computing, it's still a work in progress. Hopefully they'll get it out before it's 1.0. Then there's the issue of method overloading. You can actually have methods taking different parameters, the same way you do it in Eleazar through pattern matching of methods. Then Crystal is just Ruby. You won't have to learn a lot when you are learning Crystal. So if you're a Rubyist, you'll feel right at home. You'll probably skim through Crystal and focusing on the differences it has compared to Ruby. One thing is like the issue of the type system, and also in terms of arrays, something like attribute assessors. I think in Crystal it's called property. Then it actually allows you to catch errors earlier since it's a compiled language. So you don't have to go through the process of running your program. Then what does Crystal offer Ruby? Crystal can actually play a key role in helping Ruby-based startups to improve on their performance. You don't have to be forced to write Go or, I don't know, another language, because Ruby is not fast enough for you. So if you need to optimize parts of a Ruby project, you can just use Crystal. And one thing with Crystal is the way it calls Ruby, it's called, like the way it calls C code, you don't have to do a lot of magic. It's as simple as just running the same code and calling just, you can build just C bindings to it. Compared to Ruby, where you have to go through a lot when calling for C bindings. So why not Crystal? In as much as it's this good, There are a few issues that I have to address. It's not yet 1.0, so there's a lot of things that may change before it reaches that point. Maybe the performance may degrade, among other things. There's also the issue of limited shards. In Crystal, they refer to gems as shards. Then it has a lot of moving parts. However, the main team actually have said that they'll try and limit this as they head to 1.0. Then there's the issue of performance degradation. Maybe it may not happen as we have right now. But one thing I can tell you is if you use the current version as it is, it can serve you right in terms of, let's say, doing something like APIs, command line applications. So here I want to do like a bigger demo. Not that big though. So currently I already have some servers. So what I did is I have like 3 applications, one in Crystal, one in Sinatra, and the other one in Rails. These are just API endpoints. I just want to measure something to do with performance and show you like, let's say if you decide to use Crystal for your API endpoints in terms of improving the performance of Ruby applications. So I'll use this tool. So the first endpoint is Crystal. I have it running. So this is supposed to run for 30 seconds. One thing is to note is we are doing, the speeds we are doing is microseconds, not even milliseconds. So that should take like 30 seconds to be done. So that was the first. So the second one, I want to run, let me go with Rails. So this, what I did is just a Rails API. I used the API only. So looking at the speed, I think we're doing like milliseconds or something. So it will take a little while, I think 30 seconds. Yeah, I think you're done. So the other one I'll do is, let me do Sinatra. So the endpoint is just the same, it's doing the same thing, doing a hello world. Sinatra as well is doing, I think, milliseconds. So it's almost done. So looking at the 3, we have that the request per second of Crystal was about 7,000. Rails was giving us about 55,000, 555. And Sinatra was giving us 2,590. So the Crystal I was using, I was just running and building it. Now let me compile it. I've already done it. Let me just kill this. And another thing with Crystal, when you're deploying it, you'll just compile it, then put up the .exe on your server. You don't have to do anything else. So that means it takes a very small amount of size. So this one will be a compiled Crystal. I think a few seconds remaining. So on this, I was doing like 2 threads and 100 connections. So having compiled Crystal, you see the performance is about 12,875. Compare this to let's say Rails. That I think is about I don't know, maybe 20 times faster. Though there were some stats they were doing where Crystal was doing 40,000 per second compared to Sinatra of around 2,000. And consider this is just on a single core. So hopefully when Crystal managed to do the parallel computing, it will be a lot faster. So what can you do to help Crystal? You can contribute Crystal to the language. One thing is Crystal is done on Crystal itself. If you know Ruby, you'll get up to speed in a month or so, or even a few days. So you can actually do actual contribution of code by helping out with the issues. There's also the issue you can try Crystal and blog about it. And also you can help in funding its development. Just go to the site. They have, I think, a bounty source page. You can try and chip in something and help the team get it to 1.0 faster. I think that's all I have for you today. Thank you.